A week passed, and Minjun returned to Harmony's grill 3 times. Always late at night when the diner was quiet, always sitting at the counter where Zara worked. He ordered coffee, simple food, and engaged her in conversation that started superficial but gradually deepened in ways neither of them seemed to plan. He told her about growing up in Seoul, about the smell of the fish markets where vendors would call out the day's catch in voices that carried across entire blocks. About his mother who'd worked 3 jobs, seamstress by day, cleaner at night, weekend shifts at a convenience store, just to keep their family fed. He edited out the parts about his father's gambling debts and the gang connections that had eventually forced them to flee, but the emotional truth remained intact. These were real memories, real pieces of himself that he rarely shared with anyone. Zara listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that felt organic rather than interrogative. She shared her fabricated backstory about Chicago, about a relationship that had ended badly when she discovered her partner had been lying about everything from his job to his marital status. About dreams of eventually moving somewhere quieter, maybe Oregon or Washington, where the rain fell soft and the ocean didn't feel so crowded. The lies came easily now, mixed so thoroughly with emotional truth that even she sometimes struggled to remember where one ended and the other began. During their 3rd encounter, Minjun asked about her family. Zara felt the weight of her cover story settling around her like a costume she'd worn so long it had started to feel like skin. "I had a sister," she said, the fabricated grief feeling almost real in her throat. "She died young. Car accident. After that, my parents kind of shut down. I've been searching for a place to belong ever since." The vulnerability in her voice wasn't entirely manufactured. Deep cover work required drawing from real emotion, real experience. The bureau trained you to mine your own life for pieces that could make the lie feel authentic. Zara had lost people too, just not in the ways her legend claimed. "That feeling of searching," Minjun said quietly, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "I understand it. You think coming to a new place will change things, will let you start fresh. But you bring yourself with you. All the same questions, same doubts. Just a different backdrop." Their conversations continued like this, circling around deeper truths while maintaining careful distance, both of them aware they were dancing around something neither could fully name. Minjun talked about the weight of responsibility, of making decisions that affected dozens of lives. Zara spoke about feeling invisible, about wondering if anyone ever really saw her beyond the uniform and the practiced smile. The tension between them built gradually. It was in the way her hand would brush his when she set down his coffee cup, in how his eyes would follow her movements across the diner floor, in the moments when their conversation would pause and they'd just look at each other, both acutely aware of the space between them and what it would mean to close it. After one particularly long shift, Zara met Torres in a parking garage downtown during her day off. He sat in his bureau sedan, windows tinted, looking tired in the way handlers always did after running multiple operations simultaneously. "He's coming back regularly," Zara reported, keeping her voice low despite the privacy. "3 times this week. We're building rapport." He's starting to open up about pressure, about the weight of leadership. Nothing prosecutable yet, but the contextual intelligence is valuable. Torres studied her face with the careful attention of someone trained to read lies. "And how are you holding up? 8 months is a long time to maintain a cover." "I'm fine," Zara said, but even she could hear the slight hesitation in her voice. "Hayes, these operations take a toll. The isolation, the constant performance, the moral complexity of getting close to targets who turn out to be human beings with families and histories. It's okay to acknowledge that it's difficult." "I can handle it," she insisted. "I'm not questioning your capability. I'm reminding you to maintain boundaries. Personal feelings compromise judgment. If you can't keep the line clear between the agent and the cover identity, we need to pull you out before you're compromised." Zara wanted to argue, to insist that she had everything under control. But Torres had decades of experience running undercover operations. He'd seen agents lose themselves in their covers, had pulled people out when they'd gotten too close to targets, when the line between investigation and involvement had blurred beyond recovery. "I understand," she said finally. Do you? Torres asked, his tone gentle but firm. Because Minjun Kwan is intelligent, observant, and extremely dangerous. He's also, by all accounts, capable of considerable charm when he wants to be. That combination is exactly how good people end up making bad choices. The warning settled in Zara's chest like a stone, heavy and cold. Because Torres was right. She could feel it happening, the way Minjun was becoming more than just a target, more than just a case file. He was becoming a person, with complexity and contradiction, with wounds and hopes that made him human rather than just criminal. That was the trap of deep cover work. You had to become real enough to be trusted, had to invest enough of yourself to make the connection genuine. But sometimes, in becoming real, you discovered parts of yourself you'd forgotten existed. Compassion for people who'd made terrible choices. Recognition that the world didn't divide neatly into good and evil, but into people navigating impossible circumstances with imperfect information. One night, after Zara had locked up the diner and flipped the sign to closed, she found Minjun waiting outside. He was leaning against the brick wall between Harmony's and the laundromat, his breath visible in the cool air, hands in his coat pockets. The street was empty except for a distant car passing on the main boulevard. "Walk you home?" he asked, his tone casual, but his body language alert, aware. Zara hesitated. This was a threshold. Accepting meant moving their interaction outside the safe boundaries of the diner, into something more personal and potentially more dangerous. Refusing meant maintaining professional distance, but possibly damaging the rapport they'd built, the trust that was so carefully constructed it felt fragile as glass. "Sure," she finally said, a note of wry amusement in her voice. "But don't get any ideas." "Wouldn't dream of it," Minjun replied, falling into step beside her. They walked through Koreatown's quiet streets, past closed shops with security gates pulled down, past late-night restaurants where smoke drifted from kitchen vents and the smell of grilling meat hung in the air. The city felt different at this hour, softer somehow, less aggressive, as if the darkness gave permission for honest conversation that daylight wouldn't allow. Minjun talked about his business, carefully skirting the illegal parts, describing the legitimate challenges of international trade. "Everything's about control," he said. "Making sure the right people get paid, the right documents get filed, the right connections get maintained. One mistake and the whole structure collapses." "Sounds exhausting," Zara observed. "It is. But you get used to it. After a while, you forget there's any other way to live." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? Like the choices you made years ago locked you into a path, and now you're just following it even though you can't remember why it mattered?" The question was so unexpectedly vulnerable, so raw, that Zara responded before her FBI training could edit her words. "Every day," she said quietly. "Every single day." Minjun stopped under a streetlight, the yellow glow casting his features in sharp relief. "I look at myself sometimes and I don't recognize who I've become. I built all of this, the business, the reputation, the power, because I thought it would make me safe. Make my family safe. But safety just means having more to lose." Zara found herself standing closer than was strictly professional, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried that had nothing to do with physical strength. "Maybe we all become strangers to ourselves eventually," she said. "Maybe that's just what survival costs." "Is that what you're doing? Surviving? Isn't everyone?" Minjun reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from a man who'd built an empire on violence. The touch was tentative, giving her every chance to step away, to maintain the distance that professionalism demanded. But she didn't move. He kissed her. It was soft at first, questioning, as if he was waiting for her to pull back or push him away. But Zara didn't. Instead, her hand found the lapel of his coat, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something desperate, hungry. Two people who'd both been alone too long, finding unexpected connection in the darkness. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they were just human beings seeking warmth in a cold city. Not a crime boss and an undercover agent, not predator and investigator, just two people who'd both forgotten what it felt like not to be constantly performing, constantly calculating, constantly alone. When they finally separated, reality crashed back in with brutal force. Zara's breath came quick and shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs. What had she just done? This wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially catastrophic to the operation. Emotional entanglement compromised judgment, created conflicts of loyalty, opened vulnerabilities that could destroy months of work. I should go, Zara said, her voice shaky, taking a step back. Minjun nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light, though she could see the conflict playing across his features, desire and duty warring with each other. Tomorrow? He asked. The word hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Tomorrow meant continuing this, whatever this was. Tomorrow meant crossing more lines, blurring more boundaries, making choices that neither of them could take back. Tomorrow, Zara confirmed and walked away quickly, not trusting herself to look back. She felt his eyes on her until she turned the corner, and even then, the weight of that kiss stayed with her like a brand, marking a moment when everything had changed and nothing could be the same again. Later, in her apartment. A modest one-bedroom that the bureau had set up with enough personal touches to sell the cover, but not enough to feel like home, Zara sat on the floor of her shower, water cascading over her while she tried to process what had just happened. She'd crossed a line. Kissing Minjun Kwan wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially catastrophic to 8 months of painstaking work. The bureau's protocols existed for exactly this reason. Emotional entanglement compromised judgment, created blind spots, made agents protect targets instead of investigating them. But even as she recognized all of this, even as she mentally prepared the conversation she'd need to have with Torres about maintaining boundaries, another part of her mind kept returning to the look in Minjun's eyes when he'd asked about living someone else's life. That hadn't been manipulation. That had been real. The problem with deep cover operations was that they required you to become real enough to be trusted. And sometimes, in becoming real, you discovered uncomfortable truths. Minjun Kwan had built a criminal empire. He was responsible for drug distribution, extortion, violence that had destroyed families and lives. These were facts, documented and indisputable. But he was also a man who'd fled poverty and violence, who'd built something from nothing, who protected his people with fierce loyalty, who carried wounds that showed in unguarded moments. These were also facts. The FBI taught you to focus on the first set of facts and ignore the second. But Zara was discovering that humans couldn't actually compartmentalize that cleanly. She saw the whole person, even when she was trying not to. She saw the contradiction. The man capable of ordering violence who also spoke about his mother with such tenderness, it made her chest ache. Justice wasn't supposed to be complicated. Criminals broke the law, agents caught them, prosecutors sent them to prison. Clean lines, clear categories. But those lines were blurring now, replaced by something messier and more human. While Zara wrestled with her conscience, across the city in a warehouse near the docks, Sung-ho Park sat across from Viktor Ivanov in a meeting that Minjun knew nothing about. He suspects nothing, Sung-ho said, accepting the glass of vodka Viktor poured. The ambush at the casino has him focused on retaliation. He thinks you're reckless, aggressive. Doesn't see the larger strategy. Victor's smile was cold, calculating. He was younger than Minjun by a decade, hungrier, willing to take risks that more experienced operators avoided. And the waitress? The one at Harmony's. A distraction, Sung-ho dismissed. Minjun's getting sentimental in his old age. He keeps going back to that diner like he's got something to prove. Let him waste time on a woman who means nothing. You've been with him how long? 23 years. Since we were kids in Seoul. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying Sung-ho with the assessing gaze of someone who trusted no one completely. And you're willing to betray him for what? Money? Twice what he pays me, Sung-ho said flatly. Plus 15% of the territory once Shadow Lotus falls. You promised that. I did. But I need to understand, 23 years of loyalty doesn't disappear overnight. Sung-ho's scarred face remained impassive. He taught me that business is business. Nothing personal. The moment he made that clear, he made this possible. You're offering a better deal. I'm taking it. That's how this world works. Victor raised his glass. To business, then. And to making sure Minjun Kwan doesn't see the knife until it's already between his ribs. They drank, sealing an agreement that had been 2 years in the making. Sung-ho had been feeding information to both sides, creating conflicts at precisely calibrated moments, ensuring that Shadow Lotus and the Russian crew stayed at war while Victor consolidated power behind the scenes. Every ambush, every provocation, every escalation had been carefully managed to weaken Minjun while making Victor appear aggressive and reckless. The truth was far more calculated. Victor wasn't trying to win a war through violence. He was trying to make Minjun destroy himself through paranoia and retaliation, to turn Shadow Lotus against its own leadership, to create chaos he could exploit. And Sung-ho, Minjun's oldest friend, his most trusted lieutenant, was the architect of it all. Can a federal agent maintain her mission when her heart begins to betray her training? The stakes are rising, and the most dangerous enemy might be the one inside yourself. Or the one standing closest, wearing the face of loyalty while planning destruction. 3 weeks had passed since that kiss under the streetlight, and the relationship between Zara and Minjun had evolved into something neither of them had planned. He came to the diner most nights now, staying until closing, and they'd walk through Koreatown talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they'd end up at his penthouse overlooking the city, sharing wine and conversation that grew more honest with each meeting. Minjun had started talking more openly about the pressures of leadership, about constantly making decisions that affected dozens of lives. He never gave her details that could be used for prosecution directly, but the contextual intelligence was valuable. Zara reported everything to Torres, who'd grown increasingly concerned, but also recognized the access she was gaining. The line between investigation and involvement had blurred so thoroughly that she could no longer see where one ended and the other began. On this particular Tuesday night, Harmony's grill was quiet. 2 truckers sat at opposite ends of the counter nursing coffee. An elderly Korean man read a newspaper in the far booth. Normal. Unremarkable. Exactly how it was supposed to be. Then Zara noticed the man in the corner booth. He was Korean, heavily built, with a scar that pulled his left cheek into a permanent sneer. He'd ordered food but wasn't eating it, his eyes tracking movements around the diner with the kind of awareness that came from training or violence or both. His hand stayed near his jacket in a position that suggested he was armed. Recognition hit her like cold water. She'd seen enough photos in FBI briefings to identify Sung-ho Park. Minjun's right-hand man, his childhood friend from Seoul, his most trusted enforcer. If Sung-ho was here watching her, that meant her cover might be compromised. Zara forced herself to continue working normally, clearing tables and refilling coffee, while her mind raced through contingency protocols. She had a panic button disguised as a key fob that would alert Torres and trigger an immediate extraction team. She had her service weapon hidden in her locker. She had training for situations exactly like this. But she also had 8 months of work invested in this operation, intelligence that could bring down one of the most sophisticated crime syndicates on the West Coast. And she had Minjun, who she'd begun to care about in ways that terrified her precisely because they weren't part of any plan. Sung-ho stood suddenly, moving toward the counter with predatory grace. Zara's hand instinctively moved toward her apron pocket where she kept the panic button, calculating distance and angles, and how quickly she could reach her weapon. Before she could activate it, the front door exploded inward. 4 men entered, all wearing dark clothes, all armed with weapons that caught the diner's harsh lighting. Zara recognized the leader instantly from surveillance photos, Pavel Volkov, Viktor Ivanov's nephew and one of his top enforcers. The Russians had found Sung-ho. What happened next occurred in seconds, but felt like slow motion. Pavel raised his weapon, shouting something in Russian that Zara didn't need to translate. The universal language of violence needs no interpretation. Sung-ho dove behind a table, drawing his own gun. The other customers screamed and scattered. the elderly man dropping his newspaper as he scrambled for cover. Zara dropped below the counter, her training taking over even as her mind struggled to process what was happening. She calculated angles, exit strategies, the distance to her locker where her Glock 19 waited. The back entrance crashed open with enough force to tear the hinges, and Minjun came through like he'd been born for violence. In that instant, Zara understood with sickening clarity that this had been a trap. The Russians had used Sung-ho as bait, knowing Minjun would come to back up his oldest friend. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. Glass shattered as bullets punched through the diner's front windows. Wood splintered where rounds hit the counter and booths. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the screams of terrified customers scrambling for exits that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Zara stayed low, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Minjun had taken cover behind the industrial dishwasher, returning fire with practiced efficiency. One of Pavel's men went down, clutching his leg, blood spreading across the tile floor. Sung-ho was pinned behind an overturned table, wounded but still fighting. This was it. The moment where 8 months of careful work either paid off or collapsed completely. Zara could activate her panic button right now. FBI tactical teams would arrive within minutes. She could end this operation with arrests, evidence, prosecutions. Everything she'd been sent here to accomplish. But Minjun was outnumbered and outgunned. Pavel's men were moving to flank his position, and from where Zara crouched behind the counter, she could see the angle they'd have in less than 10 seconds. A clean shot that Minjun wouldn't see coming until it was too late. She made her decision in the space between heartbeats. Zara moved to her locker, hands shaking as she pulled open the door and grabbed the stack of community college textbooks she'd hollowed out months ago. Her Glock 19 sat nested in the carved-out pages, exactly where she'd hidden it on her first day at Harmony's. The weight of it in her hand was familiar, grounding, cutting through the chaos with cold certainty. Her Quantico training flooded back, muscle memory built through thousands of hours on the range. Proper stance. Controlled breathing despite the adrenaline. Smooth trigger pull. She came up from behind the counter with the weapon extended, acquiring her first target. Not Minjun. The Russians. Her first shot hit Pavel in the shoulder, spinning him around. The impact threw off his aim, his return fire going wide. Her second shot took out the man trying to flank Minjun's position, catching him in the chest. He went down hard, weapon clattering across the floor. Minjun's eyes found hers across the chaos, and in that split second, everything changed. The way she moved, the way she handled the weapon, the tactical decisions she was making, it all screamed law enforcement. There was no way to hide it now, no cover story that could explain away the professional competence of her shooting. He knew. She saw the recognition in his face, saw the betrayal and understanding flash across his features in equal measure. But there was also something else, grudging respect, maybe, or the grim acknowledgement that they were both doing what they had to do to survive the next 60 seconds. Pavel had recovered enough to fire again, his bullet taking a chunk out of the counter inches from Zara's head. She dropped back down, her training warring with terror. This wasn't a controlled exercise on a bureau range. These were real bullets fired by men who would kill her without hesitation if they realized she was federal. The back. Minjun shouted to her, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears from the gunshots. There's an exit through the kitchen. Zara made her way to where Sung-ho had collapsed, bleeding from a leg wound. She grabbed him under the arms, hauling him toward the kitchen with strength born of adrenaline and desperate determination. Minjun provided covering fire, then followed, the three of them crashing through the kitchen door just as Pavel's remaining men regrouped for another assault. They burst into the alley behind the diner. Minjun had a car waiting. A black Mercedes with bulletproof windows and an engine that roared to life when he hit the ignition. They piled in, Sung-ho groaning in pain, Zara applying pressure to his wound with dish towels she'd grabbed from the kitchen. Minjun drove like the entire LAPD was chasing them, which, Zara realized with growing horror, they probably would be soon. In the distance, sirens began their distinctive wail, police responding to reports of gunfire in Koreatown. She'd just engaged in a firefight protecting criminal targets. She'd killed or wounded civilians, even if those civilians were Russian mobsters. She'd compromised an FBI operation. She'd committed career suicide and possibly actual crimes. And she'd do it again, because watching Minjun die wasn't something she could have lived with. The Mercedes tore through the empty streets, putting distance between them and Harmony's grill, between them and the life Zara had been living for 8 months, between them and any pretense that this operation was salvageable in any conventional sense. In the rearview mirror, Minjun's eyes met hers. No words were needed. They both understood that everything had changed, that the careful dance they'd been performing had just ended in the most violent way possible. And now they'd have to face the consequences. They ended up at Minjun's safe house, a minimalist apartment in a building he owned under a shell company. 15 floors up with panoramic views of Los Angeles sprawling in every direction, the city lights glittering like fallen stars against the darkness. It was the kind of place designed for emergencies, sparse furniture, no personal items, nothing that could connect it to Minjun's legitimate identity. Minjun carried Sung-ho inside while Zara's mind spun through the implications of what she'd just done. A discreet doctor arrived within 20 minutes, the kind who asked no questions and kept no records, and began treating Sung-ho's leg wound in the bedroom. Zara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her gun still in her hand, unable to put it down. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, someone wearing her face, but belonging to a life she no longer recognized. Behind her, she could see Minjun watching her, waiting. "Who are you really?" His voice came from behind her, low and dangerous. She turned to find him standing there, his own weapon drawn but pointing at the floor, his face a mask of controlled fury and hurt and something else that might have been understanding. Zara took a breath. No more lies. No more cover stories. After what had just happened, there was no point in pretending anymore. Special Agent Zara Hayes, FBI. I've been embedded here for 8 months, building a case against Shadow Lotus. She expected him to raise the gun, to call for Sung-ho, to make the decision that any rational crime boss would make when discovering a federal informant in his midst. Instead, Minjun laughed, a bitter, broken sound that held no humor whatsoever. "Of course you are," he said, moving to the bar and pouring himself 3 fingers of whiskey. "The moment I let someone in, the moment I start to think maybe there's something in this world besides power and survival, it turns out to be a lie." "It wasn't all a lie," Zara said quietly, setting her gun down on the table between them, a gesture of trust that might be the last mistake she ever made. "The conversations we had, the things I told you about feeling lost, about wanting to belong somewhere, that was real. More real than I've been with anyone in years. But you were still gathering intelligence, building a case, planning to put me in prison for the rest of my life." Yes, she admitted, because anything less than total honesty now would be an insult to both of them. "That was the job. That's what I was sent here to do." Minjun drained his whiskey, poured another, and stared at her with eyes that had gone cold. "So why did you save me tonight? Why not let Pavel finish what he started, close your case with a nice clean ending where the criminals kill each other and the FBI sweeps in to clean up?" It was a fair question. Zara had been asking herself the same thing since the moment she'd pulled the trigger. Because somewhere between the cover story and the mission objectives, I forgot how to separate the agent from the woman. And the woman couldn't stand by and watch you die. That's not good enough. It's the truth. They stood there in tense silence, the city glittering beyond the windows, both of them armed and exhausted and trapped in a situation that had no good outcome. The weight of what she'd done was starting to settle in, the career she'd destroyed, the protocol she'd violated, the line she'd crossed that could never be uncrossed. The bedroom door opened and Sung-ho limped out, the doctor following behind him. Minjun gestured toward Zara. "She's FBI. Has been this whole time." Zara tensed, calculating the distance to her weapon, knowing she couldn't reach it before Sung-ho drew. But Minjun raised a hand, stopping whatever his enforcer had been about to do. She also just saved both our lives, Minjun continued. Which means she's compromised her own position, probably destroyed her career. So before we make any decisions, I want answers. Sung-ho's scarred face was unreadable as he looked between them. Then he said something that changed everything. There's more. Something you need to know about what's really been happening. Minjun's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? The escalation with the Russians. The way conflicts kept happening at exactly the wrong times, in exactly the wrong ways. Boss, I've been investigating and… Sung-ho pulled out his phone, brought up a series of text messages and financial transfers. Someone's been feeding information to both sides. Someone close to you has been manipulating this war, trying to get you and Victor to destroy each other. Zara stepped closer, her FBI training kicking in as she scanned the evidence. The patterns were clear once you knew what to look for: leaked shipment schedules, ambush locations provided to both sides, strategic provocations designed to ensure maximum conflict. Who? Minjun demanded, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Sung-ho met his eyes. Me. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the city sounds from outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the three of them in a moment of crystallized betrayal. Victor offered me twice what I was making, Sung-ho said, almost conversationally. Plus a percentage of the territory once you were dead. He's been planning this for 2 years, slowly positioning pieces. I've been feeding him information, creating opportunities, making sure you stayed at war until one of you finished the other. Minjun moved with shocking speed, his hand closing around Sung-ho's throat, slamming him back against the wall hard enough to crack the drywall. You, my brother, the person I trusted more than anyone in this world. Business, Sung-ho choked out, his face turning red. Nothing personal. You taught me that. It's always just business. Zara's hand moved toward her weapon, torn between sworn duty and impossible circumstance. She should be calling for backup. She should be documenting this confession. She should be doing a dozen things that her FBI training demanded. Instead, she watched Minjun struggle with rage and betrayal, saw the man behind the crime boss fully exposed. Minjun's fingers tightened on Sung-ho's throat, and Zara saw the exact moment when he made his decision. He released his grip, stepping back, his face a mask of cold fury. Get out, he said quietly. Before I change my mind. And if I ever see you again, if you ever come near anyone I care about, I will kill you slowly enough that you'll beg for the mercy of a bullet. Sung-ho stumbled toward the door, pausing at the threshold. She's FBI, boss. She'll destroy everything you've built. She already has, Minjun replied. Now get out. When they were alone, Minjun turned to Zara. You have a choice to make. Call your people, report what happened tonight, put me in custody. It's what you're supposed to do. What you were sent here to do. And if I don't? Then we finish this. Together. Victor thinks he's won because he's turned my most trusted lieutenant. He doesn't know about you, doesn't know that his ambush failed. We use that. We end this war in a way that doesn't leave the streets full of bodies. Zara's mind raced. What he was proposing was conspiracy, was active participation in a criminal enterprise. It was everything she'd sworn an oath to prevent. But it was also a chance to bring down both organizations with minimal collateral damage, to protect innocent people caught in the crossfire of mob war. I need to make a call, she said finally. She stepped into the bathroom, locked the door, and dialed Torres on the encrypted line. When he answered, his voice was tight with worry. Hayes, where the hell are you? We've got reports of a shootout at Harmony's. Your panic button never activated. I'm safe, Zara said. But I'm compromised. Minjun knows who I am. A long pause. We're extracting you. Now. Give me your location. No. Hayes, listen to me. I have an opportunity to bring down both Shadow Lotus and the Russian crew in one operation. But I need 48 hours and your trust that I know what I'm doing. You're asking me to let a compromised agent remain in an active situation with a high-value target who knows her identity. That's not protocol, that's suicide. It's also the best chance we'll have to end this without more bodies on the street. You know I'm right. Another pause, longer this time. 48 hours, Torres finally agreed. But Hayes, if this goes south, the Bureau can't protect you. You'll be on your own. I've been on my own since I walked into that diner 8 months ago, Zara replied, and ended the call. When she emerged from the bathroom, Minjun was staring out the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. Did you call in the cavalry? I bought us time, Zara said. 48 hours to figure out how to end this without turning LA into a war zone. Minjun turned to face her, and in his eyes, she saw something shift. Not trust, exactly, that would take years to rebuild, if it was even possible. But recognition. Understanding. A shared acknowledgement that they were in this together now, for better or worse. I know where Victor keeps his main operations, he said. And I know how to get inside. But it'll be dangerous. For both of us. Everything about this has been dangerous from the start, Zara replied. We just stopped pretending otherwise. How do you trust someone who's been lying for months? The clock is ticking, and Viktor Ivanov doesn't know the two people who should hate each other most just became the most dangerous team he'll ever face. The 48 hours that followed were a masterclass in controlled chaos, strategic deception, and the kind of improvisation that either ended wars or started new ones. Zara and Minjun worked through the night, mapping out Victor's operations with a combination of FBI intelligence and Minjun's street-level knowledge. What emerged was a picture of an organization even more sophisticated than the Bureau had realized. Victor wasn't just another gang boss. He was building a network that stretched from the port of LA all the way to connections with Eastern European cartels. He's using the war with you as cover, Zara observed, studying the pattern of shipments and money transfers she'd pulled from FBI databases. Every time your organizations clash, it distracts from his real operations. He's been consolidating power while everyone watches you two fight. Minjun nodded grimly, pulling up a blueprint of a warehouse complex in San Pedro. This is where Victor runs his main distribution. Protected, isolated, defensible. But there's a weakness. Which is, he thinks I'm dead or at least severely weakened. Somehow will have reported the ambush, probably claimed he barely escaped himself. Victor will be celebrating, getting careless. That's when we hit him. Zara studied the blueprints with a tactical eye, already calculating entry points and fallback positions. We'll need backup. I can bring in a tactical team. No. Minjun's voice was flat. The moment the FBI shows up in force, Victor disappears. He's got warning systems, escape routes, contingency plans. This needs to be quiet, surgical. You're asking me to conduct an illegal raid without authorization or backup. That's not going to happen. They stared at each other across the table, the fundamental conflict between them rising to the surface again. He needed to operate outside the law to be effective. She was sworn to uphold it. There had to be a middle path. What if, Zara said slowly, we give the FBI everything they need to build an airtight case, but the actual takedown happens in a way that looks organic? A falling out between criminal organizations, captured on multiple surveillance devices, with enough evidence left behind to prosecute everyone involved. Minjun considered this. You want to stage a coup? Make it look like Victor's own people turned on him. Exactly. We go in, we gather evidence, we record everything. Then we trigger a situation where the FBI has no choice but to respond, but by the time they arrive, the main players are already neutralized. And what happens to me in this scenario? It was the question Zara had been avoiding. I don't know, she admitted. I can try to work out some kind of deal, maybe witness protection in exchange for testimony. But Minjun, you have to understand, I can't just let you walk away. That's not justice. Justice, Minjun repeated, his laugh bitter. I've spent 20 years building an empire because the justice system failed people like my family. We came to America legally, worked 3 jobs, followed every rule, and still got crushed by a system that didn't care if we lived or died. So yes, I broke the law. I became the thing that scared people. Because it was that or disappear. I understand that, Zara said quietly. And I'm not saying the system is perfect. But you've also hurt people, Minjun. Sold drugs that destroyed families. Extorted business owners who were just trying to survive. You can't justify that. I can't, he agreed. but I can try to end it in a way that minimizes the damage going forward. Isn't that worth something? The question hung between them, unanswerable and necessary. As dawn broke over the city, they stood on the balcony of the safe house, watching the sky transform from black to deep blue to gold. Minjun lit a cigarette, a habit Zara hadn't seen him indulge before, but stress had a way of resurrecting old patterns. "When this is over," he said without looking at her, his breath mixing with cigarette smoke in the cool air, "assuming we both survive, you'll arrest me." "Probably. And we'll never see each other again." "Probably not." He took a long drag, exhaled slowly. "For what it's worth, meeting you was the first time in 20 years I remembered what it felt like to be human. Not a boss, not a criminal, just a person. I know that doesn't change anything, but I wanted you to know." Zara moved to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "It changes everything," she said softly. "But not in a way that helps either of us." They stood there in silence, watching the city wake up, both knowing that in 24 hours, one way or another, this strange alliance would end. The warehouse raid happened at sunset the next day, golden light slanting through the industrial district of San Pedro, where shipping containers stacked like metal mountains and the air smelled of salt water and diesel fuel. Minjun had made contact with Victor through back channels, proposing a meeting to discuss territory and peace terms. Victor, believing Minjun was weakened and desperate after the diner ambush, had agreed eagerly. He saw it as an opportunity to finish what the restaurant attack had started, a chance to eliminate his rival while pretending to negotiate. What Victor didn't know was that Zara had spent the pre-dawn hours infiltrating the warehouse complex, wiring it with FBI surveillance equipment that would capture every word, every transaction, every piece of evidence needed to build prosecutions that would survive any courtroom challenge. Tiny cameras hidden in ventilation grates, audio devices disguised as electrical boxes, technology so sophisticated it could count the serial numbers on currency from across the warehouse floor. What Victor also didn't know was that Minjun had spent the previous week reaching out to several of Victor's own lieutenants, the ones who'd been growing increasingly concerned about their boss's erratic leadership and risky strategies. Minjun had offered them something Victor never had: respect, fair dealing, and a way out that didn't end with prison or bullets. The meeting. The warehouse was a cavernous space filled with shipping containers and the machinery of international smuggling. Forklifts sat idle in corners. Pallets stacked with legitimate cargo provided cover for what lay hidden beneath: cocaine from South America, heroin from Asia, weapons that would never appear on any manifest. Minjun arrived with 2 guards, Shadow Lotus members loyal enough to follow him into what looked like certain death. Victor had a dozen men arranged throughout the space, weapons visible, confidence radiating from every gesture. He stood in the center of the warehouse floor like a king receiving supplicants, his expensive suit somehow making him look more dangerous rather than civilized. "Quan," Victor said, his Russian accent thick, his smile predatory. "I'm surprised you're alive. Heard you had some trouble at a diner." "Rumors of my death were premature," Minjun replied calmly, his hands visible, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling through the air. "I'm here to propose a partnership. Your war with Shadow Lotus has been profitable for both of us in some ways, but it's also drawn too much attention. The FBI is circling. We need to consolidate, present a unified front." Victor laughed, the sound echoing off metal walls. "You think I need you? Your organization is broken. Your trusted lieutenant works for me now. You have nothing to offer except your surrender. I have this." Minjun pulled out a tablet, his movements slow and deliberate so Victor's men wouldn't interpret it as reaching for a weapon. He brought up financial records showing Victor's skimming operations, how he'd been stealing from his own organization, hiding money in accounts his lieutenants knew nothing about. Sung-ho's betrayal had at least provided useful intelligence before he disappeared into whatever fate awaited traitors in their world. The faces of Victor's men shifted as they recognized the implications. Alexei, a lieutenant who Minjun had been secretly negotiating with, stepped forward to see the screen better. Others moved closer, their loyalty suddenly questionable, their trust in Victor cracking like ice under pressure. "Where did you get that?" Victor demanded, his hand moving toward the weapon at his hip. "From someone who wanted your people to know that loyalty should run both directions," Minjun said. "Your men have been questioning your leadership. I'm offering them a better option." What happened next happened fast. Alexei drew his weapon and pointed it at Victor instead of Minjun. Two others followed his lead, the betrayal instantaneous and decisive. Victor's face contorted with rage, and he opened fire. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Bullets ricocheted off metal containers with sharp pinging sounds that competed with the deeper boom of gunfire. Men scrambled for cover behind pallets and machinery. Minjun dove behind a forklift, his guards returning fire. The careful choreography of violence unfolded exactly as planned and completely out of control at the same time. Through it all, hidden FBI cameras captured everything: the weapons, the drugs visible in open containers, the conversations that constituted conspiracy charges, the violence that would seal multiple murder indictments. Evidence accumulating with every second, building a case that would be impossible to fight. Zara watched from a rooftop across the street with Torres and the tactical team, binoculars pressed to her eyes, radio in her other hand. She could see the muzzle flashes through the warehouse windows, could hear the gunfire even at this distance. "We've got enough," she said into her radio, her voice steady despite the fear knotting her stomach. "Move in." FBI vehicles descended on the warehouse from 3 directions, flooding the space with agents in tactical gear. The shooting stopped as criminal and federal authority both recognized that the game had changed. Victor, wounded in the shoulder but alive, was taken into custody with enough force to make clear that resistance would be fatal. His lieutenants, seeing an opportunity for deal-making, surrendered immediately. Alexei was already talking, already offering information in exchange for reduced charges. The Russian cruise network would be dismantled piece by piece, each arrest leading to the next like dominoes falling. And Minjun Kwan stood in the center of the chaos with his hands raised, his weapon on the ground at his feet, his expression unreadable. FBI agents surrounded him, shouting commands, but his eyes searched the warehouse entrance until they found Zara. She stood there in her FBI windbreaker, no longer the waitress from Harmony's Grill, fully herself for the first time in 8 months. Their eyes locked across the distance, and Minjun's lips moved, forming 2 words she could read even without hearing them. "Thank you." Then agents pushed him to his knees, cuffed his hands behind his back, and the man who'd ruled Koreatown's underworld became just another suspect in federal custody. Immediate consequences. The aftermath took weeks to sort out. Viktor Ivanov and 8 of his top people were charged with dozens of crimes based on the evidence gathered from the warehouse. The Russian cruise network was dismantled piece by piece, each arrest revealing new connections, new operations, new victims. Federal prosecutors had enough evidence to keep them busy for years. Sung-ho Park was found floating in the LA River 3 days after the raid. Whether he'd been killed by remnants of Shadow Lotus settling accounts or by Victor's people tying up loose ends, no one could definitively say. The investigation remained open, but in the world he'd inhabited, some questions were better left unanswered. Minjun was arrested, as Zara knew he would be. But Torres, recognizing the value of what had been accomplished and the cooperation Minjun had provided, worked out a deal. In exchange for testimony against Victor's organization and information about Shadow Lotus's international connections, Minjun would receive a reduced sentence, 10 years instead of life, with possibility of parole in 7. It wasn't justice, not really. It was compromise, the messy reality of how law enforcement actually worked when you stepped outside the clean lines of procedure manuals. Zara testified at the hearings, laying out the 8 months of undercover work, the intelligence gathered, the operation's success. She left out certain details, the personal relationship, the kiss under the streetlight, the way she'd felt when she'd pulled the trigger to save his life. Those weren't relevant to the case, she told herself. They were just complications that would raise questions she didn't want to answer. The Bureau offered her a commendation and a promotion. She turned down the promotion, requested a transfer to the Sacramento field office. Staying in Los Angeles felt impossible now. Everywhere she looked, she saw memories of those 8 months, when she'd been someone else, when the lines between right and wrong had blurred into something more human and harder to define. 6 months after the trial concluded, Zara received a letter. No return address, but she recognized the handwriting from the Chinese takeout orders she'd seen Minjun make at the diner. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 lines written in careful script. The tip was always yours. Use it wisely. And below that, a set of numbers, coordinates to an offshore account containing exactly $1 million. Clean money, as far as any forensic accountant could prove, belonging to no one and transferable to anyone. Zara stared at the numbers for a long time. By all rights, she should report this. It was likely proceeds from criminal enterprise, even if it couldn't be proven. Taking it would compromise every principle she'd stood for throughout her career. But she also thought about what Torres had said once, about how deep cover operations took pieces of you that you never got back. About how the Bureau used people and moved on. About sacrifice and service and the quiet ways both could destroy you. In the end, Zara donated most of the money anonymously to organizations that supported immigrant families and addiction recovery, causes that addressed some of the root problems that had created men like Minjun Kwon in the first place. But she kept enough to buy a small cabin in Oregon, overlooking a lake, far from the chaos of undercover work and impossible choices. She didn't return to the Bureau. She resigned quietly, taking a job teaching criminal justice at a community college, sharing war stories edited for legal safety with students who still believed the world divided neatly into right and wrong. Years later, a reporter working on a story about organized crime in Los Angeles tracked down Zara Hayes at her Oregon cabin. He wanted to interview her about the Shadow Lotus case, about the undercover operation that had brought down 2 crime syndicates simultaneously. She declined, of course. But before the reporter left, he mentioned something interesting. Minjun Kwon had been released on parole after 7 years. Good behavior, continued cooperation with federal investigations. He'd moved to Seattle, started a legitimate import business, stayed clean. The reporter had tried to reach him for comment, but Minjun had refused all interviews. Did he say anything? Zara heard herself ask, unable to resist. The reporter checked his notes. Just one thing. He said that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the thing that teaches you how to be better than you were. He said he learned that from someone who saw him more clearly than he saw himself. After the reporter left, Zara sat on her porch and watched the sun set over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. She thought about writing a letter, about reaching out, about seeing if whatever had existed between them could survive in the real world, outside the pressures of undercover operations and criminal empires. But she didn't. Because some stories end at the beginning, and some connections are meant to stay suspended in that moment before reality intrudes. What they'd had was real, but it was also impossible, and trying to resurrect it would diminish what it had meant. Still, she kept the original $1,000 bill. Minjun had never actually taken it back that first night, and she'd found it later in her locker at the diner. She'd kept it all these years, a reminder of the moment when 2 people playing roles had briefly seen each other clearly, before the weight of their choices pulled them apart. It was worth more than any amount of money, that moment of recognition. It was worth everything and nothing at all. And on quiet nights, when the lake was still and the stars reflected on its surface, Zara would take out the bill and remember what it felt like to be fully human. Flawed and conflicted and capable of seeing beyond the categories we use to organize the world into good and evil, right and wrong, criminal and cop. Sometimes the lines blur. Sometimes you make the best choice you can in an impossible situation. Sometimes respect goes both ways, even when everything else divides you. And sometimes that has to be enough. What happens when you realize the person you were sent to destroy sees you most clearly? Can redemption exist outside the law, and does justice always look like punishment? This is the story of two people who met between their roles, found something real in deception, and learned that recognizing another person's humanity matters, even when everything demands you see them as enemy. If you want to know what really happens when loyalty, duty, and unexpected connection collide, subscribe for more stories exploring the complicated truth behind headlines. Drop a comment. Do you think Zara made the right choice? What would you have done? Remember, in a world of easy answers, the hardest questions force us to admit that sometimes everyone's both right and wrong at the same time.